Most survivors die with the same sentence on their lips: I thought I could handle the cold. That belief is the first confident mistake, and it kills faster than starvation, dehydration, or infection. People assume their bodies will tough it out. Assume shivering means they're fighting back. Assume they can warm up once they find shelter or make fire. All of that collapses the moment calories disappear. You can't shake off physics. You can't out-tough thermodynamics. And you can't negotiate with the cold. The truth is brutal. You don't freeze because it's cold. You freeze because you keep losing heat you can't afford to lose. Survivors keep thinking warmth is something they can create later. In the apocalypse, later doesn't exist. Fire betrays your position. Fuel runs out. Fat reserves vanish. Every degree of heat your body loses is gone forever, and that irreversible bleed is the real threat. The world before taught comfort. The world after punishes assumption. If you hold on to the old belief that staying warm is about endurance or willpower, you won't make it through the first metabolic crash. Survival begins only when you accept the new rule. You don't fight the cold. You fight your own heat from escaping. The old world conditioned people to believe that warmth is something you create. Strike a flame, burn a log, switch on a heater, and the cold retreats. That belief is the second confident mistake, and in a calorie-starved apocalypse, it becomes a death sentence. When food is scarce and metabolic fuel collapses, heat is no longer something you make. It is something you lose. And the mathematics of loss is absolute. Every breath you exhale carries warmth into the void. Every draft that slips through fabric steals degrees you can't regenerate. Every drop of sweat you produce because you moved too fast, layered too wrong, or panicked too early evaporates and strips heat with the precision of a scalpel. This is why the first operational principle you must accept is ruthless in its simplicity. Conservation before creation. The battle is not about raising your temperature, it is about slowing its decline. Fire becomes a luxury. Fuel becomes a liability. Movement becomes a metabolic expenditure you can no longer afford to waste. You are operating inside a world where thermodynamics outguns willpower. Heat retention is not a comfort tactic. It is a defensive doctrine. You seal gaps. You compress air volume. You eliminate convection, block radiation, and deny the environment every opportunity to drag you toward the hypothermic threshold. You build microclimates, not bonfires. You think like an engineer, not a camper. Every layer, every position, every enclosure must obey this principle. When systems die, heat is time. And the only survivors are the ones who understand that losing even a single degree is not discomfort. It is attrition. The world isn't cold. The world is hungry for your warmth, and you are the only one left who can refuse to feed it. The thermal shell barrier is not clothing. It is not comfort. It is not style, layering, or brand logic carried over from the world that collapsed. It is your artificial skin, your second perimeter, the engineered boundary that decides whether your remaining calories will hold the line or bleed into the atmosphere. Most people die because they misunderstand insulation. They think more layers equal more warmth. They think thickness equals protection. They think sweat is a minor inconvenience. All wrong. Insulation is not about heating you. It is about trapping the heat you already possess. And that means every choice you make must be governed by the physics of retention. The shell works only when it forms a closed system, an outer barrier that denies wind penetration, an inner layer that manages moisture, and a controlled air pocket that captures radiant heat without letting it escape. You are building a microclimate around your body, not piling fabric on top of it. If the shell leaks, you die slowly. If it wets, you die quickly. Moisture is the enemy most survivors ignore because they forget that evaporation is a caloric executioner. Once your sweat begins removing heat faster than your body can generate it, you are already on the downward slope. The thermal shell barrier demands discipline, pace control, breath pacing, micro movements that avoid overheating without exposing skin. You must treat your shell like a pressure hull. No gaps, no careless openings, no compromises. Pulling off gloves for a moment, loosening a zipper, exposing the neck. Small mistakes become catastrophic in a calorie crash. The cold doesn't need to overpower you. It simply waits for these breaches. Your shell is the fortress that stands between your body heat and the world determined to steal it. And any lapse in maintaining that fortress is an invitation to collapse. The micro-reflective heat matrix is the tool most survivors underestimate because it doesn't look powerful. A thin metallic sheet, a crinkled panel, a flimsy-looking barrier, easily dismissed, fatally misunderstood. They imagine it works like a blanket, something that warms them, but nothing could be further from the truth. Reflective matrices generate nothing. They only redirect what you produce. In a calorie crash, that makes them one of the most strategically efficient tools on the planet. When your metabolic output is falling and your body is shedding heat through radiation, this tool becomes a multiplier. It takes what little you create and folds it back into you. The physics is ruthless and simple. Your body is a leaking power source, and the matrix bends the escaping energy back toward the core. But efficiency requires discipline. Angle matters. Enclosure matters. Contact points matter. A reflective barrier is not meant to be draped loosely or left fluttering in open air. It must be shaped into a containment geometry that traps heat instead of dispersing it. The smart survivor closes the system, wraps the matrix tight, seals edges, creates a cocoon that denies radiation any pathway out. Inside shelters, they angle reflective panels to form a thermal funnel, amplifying the warmth of even a weak fire or a struggling body. Outdoors, they convert the matrix into a wind-sealed chamber, turning the cold environment into an inadvertent amplifier of their own heat. The tool becomes most lethal when paired with stillness. No movement, no sweat, no disruption of the radiant loop. You are bending your heat back onto yourself with surgical precision. When you use the micro-reflective heat matrix correctly, the cold doesn't weaken. You simply stop feeding it. The low-volume sheltering capsule is the antidote to the most reckless survival instinct people carry from the old world. The belief that more space equals more comfort. In a calorie-starved apocalypse, space is not comfort. Space is death. A large shelter bleeds heat faster than your failing metabolism can replace it. Every cubic centimeter of air you attempt to warm becomes a parasite feeding on your caloric reserves. Most survivors don't grasp this. They build roomy tents, sit under wide tarps, crawl into abandoned cabins, thinking shelter is about walls and a roof. It isn't. Shelter is about reducing the atmospheric battlefield to the smallest possible arena. The smaller the volume, the faster you stabilize the heat you already possess. That is why the low-volume sheltering capsule, bivy, crawl shelter, thermal pod, improvised tarp cocoon, becomes a life-saving doctrine. It forces the environment into a contained microclimate your weakened body can still influence. You shrink the world until the cold can no longer overwhelm you through sheer volume. Inside the capsule, the rules change. Airflow is minimized. Wind is eliminated. Convection stops. Heat pools around you instead of dispersing. The capsule compensates for your declining caloric output by giving radiant heat nowhere else to go. But it demands absolute commitment. No unnecessary openings, no shifting that breaks the seal, no impatience that causes you to widen the space for comfort. Comfort is irrelevant. Volume is the enemy. Smart survivors engineer their capsules with single entry points, angled walls, low ceilings, and tight wraps that compress the shelter to the bare minimum required to breathe. They don't seek room. They seek containment. The goal is not to feel warm. It is to deny the cold the cubic meters it needs to dismantle you. In the apocalypse, the shelter that saves you is the one just barely large enough to hold your body and nothing else. The biological heat compaction system begins with a truth most survivors refuse to accept. Your body is both the final generator and the final reservoir of heat you possess. And when calories collapse, it becomes a dwindling reactor struggling to stay online. You cannot will it to burn hotter. You cannot push it to fight through the cold. What you can do is trap what little output remains by restructuring your posture, your circulation, and your metabolic rhythm into a single, unified retention system. Heat compaction is not comfort. It is geometry. Every limb extended is a heat leak. Every joint opened is a radiative surface exposed to the environment. This is why the fetal position persists as one of nature's most efficient survival shapes. It minimizes surface area, protects core zones, and consolidates circulation around vital organs. But in a calorie crash, compaction must become more deliberate than instinct. You tighten the legs to the torso, pull the arms into the chest, drop the chin, and reduce the silhouette of your body until you are a single thermal mass. Movement is the enemy. Even minor shifts increase convection within your insulation layers and stir pockets of warm air you cannot replace. The discipline is stillness. Controlled micro-movements only when circulation threatens to stall. Breathing becomes part of the system. Slow, paced, low-volume breaths keep warm air near the face without saturating fabric with moisture. You are modulating metabolic burn, not escalating it. The goal is to keep the core above the critical threshold without triggering caloric consumption spikes that accelerate collapse. Survivors who fail to compact lose heat through their extremities first, then through their torso. And by the time confusion sets in, the process is irreversible. You are not curling up for comfort. You are collapsing your heat field into the smallest, tightest, most defensible form it can take. The passive ground isolation platform addresses a threat most survivors never even notice until it's too late. The ground is not neutral. It is a heat vacuum. A silent predator that drains warmth with a consistency no storm or wind can match. People think cold air is the enemy, but conduction is colder, faster, and deadlier. The moment your body makes contact with soil, concrete, snow, or debris, you are surrendering heat directly into a limitless thermal sink. In a calorie crash, this is suicide. Your metabolism cannot outrun conduction. It can only delay it. That is why ground isolation becomes a non-negotiable doctrine. You must elevate, buffer, and separate. The platform, whether it's a foam pad, debris stack, leaf mound, air gap, or an improvised suspension, is not comfort gear. It is life support. A few centimeters of separation can mean the difference between gradual cooling and catastrophic drop. The physics is merciless. Air is a poor conductor. Earth is an excellent one. Your job is to replace Earth with air anywhere your body touches. Survivors who underestimate this principle crawl into shelters, lie down to rest, or attempt to sleep directly on the ground, believing their clothing will compensate. It won't. Insulation compresses under weight, eliminating the trapped air it relies on. When that happens, your shell becomes useless and the ground claims your heat with mathematical certainty. The passive ground isolation platform demands constant evaluation. Check for compression. Maintain lift. Add layers when possible. Improvise air pockets with branches, bark, clothing bundles, or even spare containers. Remember that you are not trying to feel warm. You are trying to prevent conduction from tearing through your defenses. The cold doesn't need to surround you to win. It only needs one point of contact. The heat loop retention hood targets the most underestimated thermal vulnerability on the human body. The head-neck-face system, the zone where survivors lose more heat than they ever realize. Not because it bleeds 40% of your warmth, as old world myths claimed, but because it is the junction where blood flow, exposed surface area, and respiratory moisture intersect in a perfect storm of thermal loss. In a calorie crash, this zone becomes a liability that can end you faster than any failing layer on your torso. Most survivors treat head insulation like an accessory, something optional, something to adjust, something to remove when uncomfortable. That is the confident mistake that kills. The heat loop retention hood is not a hat. It is a sealed micro-environment that cycles warm air, locks radiant heat against arterial pathways, and stabilizes face zone temperature without flooding the fabric with moisture. Its effectiveness comes from closure, not thickness. A proper hood creates a thermal loop. You warm the air inside the enclosure. Inhale slightly warmer oxygen. Exhale slightly less into the void, and maintain a circulation of heat around the carotid highways feeding your brain. But this system punishes impatience. If you breathe too heavily, moisture saturates the enclosure, turning it into a refrigeration chamber. If the seal breaks, convection strips warmth from your neck and jaw faster than your starving metabolism can replace it. Precision becomes doctrine. Shape the hood tightly. Layer only enough to avoid compression. Maintain a controlled breathing cadence that preserves warmth without saturating fabric. You are not protecting your head for comfort. You are safeguarding the command center your entire survival depends on. Heat lost here cascades into confusion, slowed reaction time, and ultimately collapse. Protect the hood, protect the loop, protect the core. The heat capture sleep protocol system operates in the most dangerous phase of human vulnerability, the hours when consciousness shuts down and metabolic output drops to its lowest point. Sleep is not rest in the apocalypse. It is a thermal negotiation with death. Most survivors underestimate this window because they believe warmth gained before sleep will carry them through the night. It won't. In a calorie crash, your core temperature begins to fall the moment you lose vigilance. Muscles relax, circulation slows, and the body abandons its defensive shivering response. If you have not created a fortified heat retention environment before unconsciousness takes over, you will not wake. That is why the heat capture sleep protocol system must be engineered with the precision of a pre-mission checklist. Every retention tool you possess, shell, reflective matrix, capsule, compaction, ground insulation, and hood, must be merged into a single integrated system. You tighten the shell to prevent nocturnal convection. You secure the reflective surfaces to fold escaping heat back onto the core. You compress the shelter volume until it is barely more than the shape of your curled body. You reinforce ground isolation at every contact point because conduction accelerates during sleep. And then, you compact your posture into the most efficient heat retention geometry the human frame can assume. Even breathing becomes part of the protocol. low volume, slow cadence, minimal moisture bleed. The final step is psychological discipline. No shifting, no expanding the space, no seeking comfort. Comfort is a pre-collapse memory. Survival is containment. The heat capture sleep protocol is not about sleeping warm. It is about refusing to let the cold dismantle you while you are defenseless. In the apocalypse, sunrise belongs only to those who mastered this system before closing their eyes. Survival in the post-collapse world is not a contest of strength, a test of mindset, or a triumph of sheer willpower. It is an equation, cold, indifferent, and governed by laws that do not bend for human desire. Every tool you've learned, every protocol you've absorbed, every illusion you've abandoned leads to this final doctrine. The apocalypse is a war of thermodynamics, and the only battlefield that matters is the one surrounding your own body. People die because they cling to the old myths. They think the world kills them with cold, when in truth it kills them with their own negligence. They think fire is the answer, when retention is the only currency they can still afford. They think movement keeps them alive, when stillness preserves what their metabolism can no longer replace. The 7 tools are not gear lists or clever tricks. They are components of a unified heat retention system designed to deny the environment every degree it tries to steal. The thermal shell barrier seals your heat. The reflective matrix returns it. The low-volume capsule traps it. Biological compaction concentrates it. Ground isolation preserves it. The heat loop hood stabilizes it. And the sleep protocol safeguards it when you are unconscious and defenseless. Together, they form the last operational framework you will ever need. Retain first, retain always. Retain at all costs. Because when calories disappear, you are no longer fighting hunger. You are fighting entropy itself. And entropy never stops. It waits for openings, for hesitation, for the small mistakes that cascade into collapse. In the end, survival is not about defeating the cold. It is about refusing to feed it. A survivor in the new world lives only by mastering the discipline of loss prevention, guarding their heat like the last asset still under their control. When you understand that, truly understand it, you stop behaving like someone trying to stay warm and start acting like someone who refuses to die.